300 rockets. 100 got through, and the system that was supposed to stop them has finally shown its ceiling. I want you to sit with that ratio for a moment, not as a statistic, as a structural verdict. 1 in 3 attacking projectiles reached its target last night. A system that Western partners were confident enough to export globally, a system elevated to near mythical status across a decade of successful interceptions, was penetrated at a rate that no defense ministry anywhere in the world can absorb without fundamentally revising every assumption it has been operating under. This was not a malfunction. This was not bad luck. This was the output of a tactical formula that someone spent years designing specifically to produce this result. I have spent my career studying systems, how they are built, how they develop confidence in their own architecture, and how that confidence, when it hardens into certainty, becomes the precise mechanism of their failure. What I watched unfold across northern Israel in the pre-dawn hours is not primarily a military story. It is a story about what happens when a system encounters the question it was never designed to answer and discovers in real time that it has no response. The fuse this time was not lit in Tehran or Gaza. It ignited along Israel's northern border, where a new front tore open with enough force to redraw the entire regional power map in a single operational window. Hezbollah launched an unprecedented mass assault of 300 rockets and loitering munitions within a compressed timeline that gave Israel's defense architecture no room to breathe, no room to reset, and no room to recover before the next wave was already incoming. The skies above northern Israel were transformed from calm to a dense web of fire. And when the smoke cleared, the numbers told a story that no official statement has yet found the language to adequately address. For over a decade, Iron Dome was celebrated as the ultimate shield, a near-impenetrable system that had repeatedly rescued Israel's civilian population from waves of fire originating in Gaza. The interception rates were extraordinary. The engineering achievement was genuine. Western partners studied it, funded it, and sought to replicate its core architecture. That confidence became a doctrine. That doctrine became an assumption. And last night, that assumption was stress-tested against a tactical architecture specifically designed to break it. When Hezbollah activated its strike package, this was not a rocket barrage in the traditional sense. The approach was not volume alone. It was the layering of that volume with a sophistication that transformed each component of the attack into a systemic exploit rather than simply a projectile. Older, low-cost rockets were fed into the swarm as decoys, forcing the defense network to burn through expensive interceptors in volume. Iron Dome batteries began cycling through intercept sequences at a rate their reload capacity could not sustain. And woven in between the decoy layer at low altitude along unpredictable flight paths with minimal radar cross-sections and terrain-hugging trajectories were UAVs nearly invisible to early warning arrays. These were not weapons of mass panic. They were precision instruments of systemic exploitation designed to arrive at the seams of the defense architecture at precisely the moment those seams were most exposed. The moment of computational overload is where the system began to tear. When hundreds of signals appear simultaneously across a radar display from multiple approach vectors, the control system is forced to process an enormous data load within an impossibly short window. That is not a design flaw. It is a physical constraint. Every system that processes information has a ceiling on how much it can handle at once. Hezbollah's strike architecture was built around the precise location of that ceiling and designed to exceed it by a calculated margin. 100 projectiles reaching their targets was not random variance. It was the output of a targeting calculus optimized to ruthless engineering precision. In Saft, Kiryat Shmona, and surrounding communities, residents spent the night in shelters as the distinction between warning signal and explosion collapsed into a single continuous roar. Military installations, power infrastructure, and civilian areas all registered hits. What emerged in the aftermath was something that had previously existed only in theoretical planning documents. No system is absolute. Israel had built its civil resilience model on the assumption that Iron Dome could absorb the vast majority of incoming threats. That assumption took a direct strike last night when 1 in 3 attacking projectiles reached its target. This means the system has reached a threshold that its designers always knew existed in theory, but that its operators had come to believe through years of successful performance would never be reached in practice. Last night, practice caught up with theory. The deeper wound is psychological. Iron Dome was never purely a military instrument. It was the psychological spine of Israeli civilian stability and economic continuity. When confidence in it erodes, the downstream effects are immediate and cascading. Financial markets reacted within hours. Social media filled with verified impact footage from urban areas. The calm that the system was designed to project gave way to a baseline of anxiety that no interceptor missile can restore once it has taken hold. Hezbollah accomplished something in this phase that extends far beyond the physical damage of the rockets themselves. It demonstrated that even the densest defensive layers can be penetrated when the right tactical architecture is applied with sufficient precision, patience, and willingness to study the adversary more deeply than the adversary has studied itself. Now, I want to take you inside what Hezbollah has actually become. Because the mental image that much of the Western analytical community has been operating with, that of a guerrilla organization lobbing unguided rockets into open fields, was demolished last night with the same finality that the rockets themselves demolished Israeli command infrastructure across the north. What unfolded was a structured warfare architecture organized with the discipline of a conventional military force. Behind that capability is Iranian technological backing that has fundamentally re-engineered what Hezbollah can do on the battlefield. The defining shift was the prominent role of precision-guided munitions. Hezbollah has mastered systems comparable to the Fateh 110 family, guided attack tools with terminal seekers capable of accuracy measured in single-digit meters. Targets are no longer broad areas selected to generate mass panic. The objective has transitioned to high-value nodes, radar stations, air defense launcher sites, military data centers, command hubs. When a precision munition locks onto one of these, the defensive system burns through its most valuable assets to protect its most critical infrastructure. The integration of those guided rockets with loitering munitions represents the most tactically sophisticated dimension of the entire campaign. While high-trajectory salvos screamed across radar screens pulling tracking systems toward the upper atmosphere, small, low-observable UAVs hugged the terrain at the base of Lebanon's complex topography, moving without acoustic signatures at altitudes that challenge early warning coverage. Evidence has emerged suggesting that specific UAV missions were tasked against Iron Dome launcher batteries at the precise moment of their firing cycle, turning the active defensive response itself into a vulnerability. When a launcher reveals its position through operation, it becomes a target. That is an extraordinarily refined tactical concept, one that transforms Israel's own defensive effort into a liability. When the shield is being penetrated from the inside, the defender faces a compounding crisis that no amount of additional interceptors can fully resolve. Why did Hezbollah choose this specific moment? The answer lies in timing exploitation. Israel is currently stretched across multiple theaters, creating a force distribution problem that a sophisticated adversary can map and exploit. Opening a full-scale northern front at that moment of dispersal forces a division of resources and imposes impossible prioritization choices that no military can fully satisfy at once. This is not simply a military strike. It is a strategic stress test designed to force Israel to make explicit trade-offs between survival priorities, and it carries an indirect message to Washington. Any escalatory move against Iran's extended network will be paid for directly in Israeli security. What creates the most sustained difficulty for Israel is the absence of a conventional target set to destroy. There are no large identifiable bases. The entire weapons infrastructure is dispersed, buried underground, embedded within civilian geography, and within an elaborate tunnel network constructed across years of meticulous preparation. Launch platforms appear, fire, and vanish in operationally compressed windows that make counter-battery response both expensive and frequently ineffective. This turns the battlefield into a prolonged pursuit where one side expends enormous resources hunting targets that are nearly invisible, while the other exercises patience and initiative simultaneously. Every hour, Israeli air assets must maintain high operational tempo, searching for and suppressing launch positions. Hezbollah simply waits for the optimal moment to re-emerge. Behind the kinetic exchange, the quieter and equally decisive contest is the war of cost and sustainability. And this is where I want you to focus, because this dimension of the conflict is where the outcome is ultimately being decided, and it is the dimension that receives the least serious analytical attention in mainstream coverage. Consider a calculation that is both simple and deeply sobering. A single Tamer interceptor missile, the core munition of Iron Dome, carries a unit cost ranging from $40,000 to $50,000. Israeli doctrine typically requires 2 interceptors per target to achieve reliable kill probability. That means each interception event consumes approximately $100,000. On the other side of the engagement, a Katyusha rocket variant or comparable munition fielded by Hezbollah carries a production cost of roughly $300 to $500. This is not merely a numerical gap. It is a structural strategic asymmetry whose implications, followed to their logical conclusion, define an attrition dynamic whose outcome is nearly predetermined. With a salvo of 300 DARP and Edish, we venture I'm With 400 rockets, Hezbollah expends under $150,000, a trivial sum relative to the financial support flowing through the regional network that Iran anchors. In response, Israel burns through approximately $15 million in interceptor costs alone within a matter of hours. Operating expenses, logistics overhead, and collateral damage from the projectiles that breach the perimeter have not even been factored into that figure. Hezbollah has no illusion that it can defeat Israel through territorial conquest or conventional confrontation. Its strategy is the construction of a sustained attrition chain, one where the adversary is worn down incrementally until its capacity for continuation degrades below the threshold required to sustain simultaneous operations across multiple fronts. Iron Dome, originally conceived as a strategic shield, is being systematically converted into a resource consumption engine. By maintaining a continuous offensive rhythm at a tempo just sufficient to generate maximal defensive response without overextending its own operational capacity, Hezbollah locks Israel into a state of permanent maximum readiness defense around the clock. Every signal on a radar screen triggers a response. Every response drains the account. Every drain on the account compounds the pressure on every other operational priority simultaneously. This is economic warfare fused with psychological pressure at the highest operational level, an environment where the adversary is forced to interrogate its own long-term viability with increasing urgency as each cycle of exchange leaves the defensive stockpile smaller than it was before. As interceptor reserves decline, Israel becomes increasingly dependent on American resupply pipelines. But Washington's capacity is not unlimited. Every congressional appropriations debate over military aid carries political friction that creates indirect strategic leverage for Hezbollah and Iran. The budget argument in Washington is a battle they do not have to fight themselves. The political system fights it for them. The financial siege extends beyond the interceptor cost line. A rocket costing a few $100s can destroy a power substation, triggering millions in cascading damage. Israel's reserve mobilization pulls tens of thousands of workers from civilian roles into combat environments, suppressing economic output while expanding state expenditure simultaneously. These pressures compose a financial siege operating in parallel to the kinetic engagement, and it does not pause between rocket salvos. Israel now faces a decision matrix with no favorable branch. Sustaining the current defensive posture means accepting the slow bleed of financial attrition across an indeterminate timeline with no visible endpoint. Pursuing a ground offensive into Lebanon means engaging an adversary that has invested years in building a defensive environment purpose-designed to maximize attacker attrition. Complex topography, an extensive tunnel network, ambush doctrine honed against exactly this type of operation, all of it designed to convert technological advantage into irrelevance and turn the most sophisticated armored vehicles on Earth into expensive wreckage in terrain that negates the advantages they were designed to exploit. The encirclement strategy extends beyond Lebanon's border. Houthi forces in Yemen, operating with upgraded Iranian-origin ballistic missiles and maritime attack drones, have continued degrading southern shipping lanes, forcing major carriers to divert or suspend operations through the Red Sea corridor. This is not peripheral harassment. It is a coordinated economic strangulation line operating in geographic synchronization with Hezbollah's northern pressure and the sustained drain from Gaza. Hezbollah degrades Israel's military capacity through attrition. The Houthis apply economic pressure through maritime disruption. And Iran provides the strategic coordination binding the entire structure into a coherent, multi-layered campaign that Israel has never faced at this scale or level of synchronization. Amid all of this, the world's major powers have settled into a state of composure that borders on unsettling. Ceasefire appeals continue to circulate across diplomatic channels and UN podiums with the regularity of a scheduled broadcast. But they exist as language, not as action. No decisive intervention follows. No enforcement mechanism activates. This silence is not indifference. It is the expression of a calculated strategic patience in which each major power is observing the battlefield, measuring outcomes, and positioning within a geopolitical contest of exceptional danger. Washington is navigating a genuinely complex dilemma: how to sustain the commitment to Israel's security while avoiding entanglement in a full-spectrum conflict against Iran, an adversary that has demonstrated strategic endurance and adaptive capacity far exceeding original Western projections. American planners understand that direct, deep engagement on two simultaneous fronts could trigger the economic detonation that most threatens the domestic political foundation required for sustained policy. A full Strait of Hormuz disruption scenario could drive crude oil to levels that cascade through American consumer prices with no clean exit. Washington's posture is therefore calibrated at the boundary between deterrence and restraint. Present, visible, but not fully committed to the vortex. The silence from the United States carries a clear, implicit signal. Unconditional backing has upper limits when weighed against total strategic cost. Russia observes with composed patience, recognizing that regional turmoil relieves pressure in other theaters simultaneously. Direct involvement is unnecessary. The conflict's gravitational pull on Western capacity is itself the outcome Moscow finds most useful. China quietly positions for the moment when reconstruction need and investment opportunity converge. The silence of all three powers, driven by entirely different calculations, produces a fragile equilibrium that permits the conflict to continue without an effective ceiling. Here's what I want you to understand, because this is where everything I have spent my career studying converges with what I am watching in real time. A system that cannot adapt to the questions it was not designed to answer will eventually be defeated by those questions. Iron Dome was designed for a specific threat profile. Hezbollah studied that profile with the patience and precision of someone who understands that the goal is not to be stronger than the defense, but to find the exact architecture that the defense cannot process. The saturation strategy, the UAV integration, the precision targeting of launcher batteries at their moment of exposure, none of this required matching Israel's technological sophistication. It required understanding Israel's technological architecture at a deeper level than Israel's own planners were comfortable acknowledging as a vulnerability. I have watched this pattern in every institution I have ever studied. The system that becomes most confident in its own architecture is the system that loses the capacity to see the questions its architecture cannot answer. The more successful Iron Dome was across a decade of operation, the more completely that success became a ceiling rather than a floor. Last night, Hezbollah found that ceiling, measured it precisely, and built an operation designed to exceed it by exactly the margin required. What happens now carries consequences that extend far beyond the immediate military situation. Israel wakes up with its northern frontier transformed into a sustained attrition environment. Its interceptor stockpile under pressure it cannot replenish at the speed the situation demands. Its economic engine absorbing simultaneous shocks from military expenditure and civilian displacement, and its strategic options reduced to a set of choices where every path carries costs that no government can comfortably acknowledge in public. Washington wakes up without a playbook that maps cleanly onto the situation it is now inside. And Tehran wakes up having demonstrated through the network it has built and coordinated across decades of patient investment that the regional order it was supposed to be contained within has already been replaced by something fundamentally different. What is your assessment? Does Israel have a path through this that does not accelerate the attrition it is already absorbing? Can Washington find a posture that is something other than the space between deterrence and paralysis? And what does it mean for every other government watching when the most celebrated missile defense system in the world shows its ceiling in real time? Leave your analysis in the comments. Share this with everyone serious about understanding what is actually unfolding. Subscribe, because in a world this dangerous, analysis that cuts through the noise is not optional. It is necessary. Stay sharp, stay questioning, and never stop asking the questions the system was not designed to answer.